Good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm Andrea Kaminsky, Club President. Thanks for joining our meeting today, which is being live streamed. Let's start by reciting the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you. As I mentioned, today's meeting is being live streamed, and that is thanks to Rotary member Brian Baskin, president of Pearson Engineering. Brian continues to be our AV wizard behind the scenes, and we're so grateful for the support he has provided to all of our online meetings to date. Jason Barron, who works with Brian, also has been working behind the scenes as the host of our live Q&A sessions, so we thank them both. Today we're trying something new. We're live streaming the meeting right at Wednesday at noon. We're here at Pearson Engineering without an in-person audience, but we know there are many watching us from your homes. Once again, Brian and Jason are behind the scenes, making it all work. So, thanks again. Looking ahead, we'll be live streaming the next 2 weeks as well, on June 17th and 24th. Then on July 1st, we won't have a meeting. On beginning July 8th, we'll be live streaming from the Park Hotel. We'll be back there with a smaller group than our previous luncheons. And we hope that everyone, all of our members, will watch our meeting online on July 8th at noon. Details will follow on how to do that. I want to remind everyone once again that District Governor Edwin Boss has invited all of us to attend the first ever District 6250 Virtual Rotary Fest. That's our district conference, and it'll take place on June 20th, Saturday, June 20th, from 7:30 a.m. until noon. You can log in right from the comfort of your own home, and you don't have to register. Take that back. You don't have to pay any fee to attend. You do have to register, and you can do that at the district website, which is rotary6250.org. Now, Susan Schmitz is here. She is chair of our Member Engagement Subcommittee, and Susan has a message for us from that committee. So I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you, Andrea, as I get mic'd up here. Hello, fellow Rotarians. It's really fun to be actually in the same, we're spacing out, but in the same room as with 5 of my fellow Rotarians today. It feels great. So yes, my name is Susan Schmitz, and I've had the privilege of being chair of the Rotary Membership Engagement Committee from 2019 to 2020, the Rotary year. The year certainly took a twist that nobody expected, but some of the work we did gave us insights into why people join our club and what they like about being a member. We received honest, thoughtful information from our membership satisfaction survey that many of you responded to in April. Thank you for your responses. Our club board of directors have agreed upon a value proposition: connect, grow, and serve. The responses from the survey were loud and clear. Connect is the reason people join and why they stay. It came across loudly and clearly in our survey responses with words like connect, friendships, meeting new people, social connections, good people, like meeting new Rotarians, interaction, I like the people, networking, fellowship, and on and on. So to get connected and to stay connected, plan on attending one of the virtual fellowship groups that have been taking place since we stopped meeting one-on-one. Here are some examples. They have all met at least 2 to 4 times, and the attendance has been actually higher than ever. First, I'm going to start with my favorite, the Scotch Whiskey Lou Harnett Society Fellowship. We have met 4 times, and each time we have met, we have had at least 20 people. It is just wonderful connecting with everyone. And then there's Dinner and Disc Fellowship, Hiking Fellowship, Notable Books, Recent Important Books, Rockefeller Investment, Second Century Fellowship, Sporting Clays Fellowship, Transitions, Veterans, Wellness Healing, and new fellowships are being formed as we speak. In fact, you can start one. So stay connected to your fellowship Rotarians and meet new interesting people. Staying connected is what we like and what we need to do. So times, dates, and information about the fellowship groups can always be found in our newsletter and our website, and I look forward to seeing as many of you as I can at the fellowship groups. Thanks so much. Here you go, Andrea.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks so much, Susan. We're learning how to pass a microphone and, from social distance. So we have birthdays to celebrate with a bit of humor or wisdom that complements Rotary's mission. And we also encourage our members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounded up to 100 for the club's Synergy Scholarship Fund. This week's birthday members are Lynette Fons, Alan Arnson, Randy Banks, Herman Bauman, who says, "I'm proud to be a Rotarian. With the challenges facing our community now, service above self is needed more than ever." Thanks, Herman. Valerie Rank, Ian Uchtem, Tom Carroll, and Carl Gutknecht. Thanks to our celebrants for their contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation. And let's wish them a happy birthday. Thank you to Casey Olkers for leading us in happy birthday. Sadly, I want to let members know that Mark Loftman's wife of 52 years, Eileen, passed away on May 26th. Our sympathies go to Mark and his family. We'll now move on to our program for today. I want to remind members that you can use the chat feature in YouTube to ask a question of our speaker today. And we'll be watching those questions for our Q&A session right after Renee finishes her presentation. But first, I'm going to call on Teresa Holmes, who chairs our club's Racial Equity and Inclusion Committee and is also a member of our club board. Teresa is owner of Exponential Endeavors, a company that provides technology solution delivery and small business entrepreneurial development services. So now, Teresa will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon, Rotarians. First of all, to the many of you who have reached out to myself and other African Americans in our club, we say thank you. Next, I would like to give you a bit of brief context regarding why we are hearing from our speaker today. In the midst of the racial tensions that have begun in our city, our communities, and our nation, our board and our program committee leadership had a conversation about speakers who could address our club as Rotarians following the wake of the rioting and the protests in Madison. It came to mind during a conversation at the program committee's meeting, feedback that we received from Alex G. during an interview where he was speaking on the issue with other leaders in the city of Madison. And someone asked Alex, what is it that we can do? What is it that the Black community can do to help us? And Alex's response, and I'm paraphrasing, was more or less, most of the time when these types of situations and tensions occur, people who are not of color, white people, will generally ask that of Black Americans. It's more appropriate if we ask, what are you going to do? In light of that, our Rotary Club and board leadership solicited, along with assistance from the program committee, fellow Rotarians who are white within our own club to speak at today's meeting. We extended our invitations to several people who were not able to speak. And one of the other individuals who was on our list is the person that you will hear today. Renee Moe has been president and CEO of the United Way of Dane County since 2016. A military kid who grew up on 3 continents, Renee earned her JBA in journalism and Mandarin Chinese, as well as an MBA from University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has been recognized with the Links Distinguished Community Service Award, YWCA Woman of Distinction Award, Wisconsin Women of Color Network Power of Unity Award, Brava Magazine Woman to Watch, UW-Madison School of Business 8 Under 40, and has served as president of our own Downtown Rotary Madison. Renee leads the United Way from an intentional and strategic way of fulfilling its mission to unite the community to create measurable results and change lives. That's accomplished by mobilizing the community's caring power to stabilize and empower families. Through significant community listening and understanding of community data, the United Way prioritizes education, financial stability, health, and how we treat each other as the building blocks of well-being and a thriving community. Renee not only leads this way, but she believes in the potential that lies within all people and is committed to fostering environments that accelerate belief in and empowerment of that potential. She is not only a leader, a Rotarian, but she's a caring and courageous person who personally influenced my own decision to become one of us. Rotarians, let us give a warm welcome to our very own Renee Moe.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is so good to see you virtually, and I'm really honored to be asked to speak today. I think one of the charges of the program committee and of the board was, as Teresa just said, to bring in somebody who was one of us. And in fact, when President Andrea called me, she said, I think it's important for this serious of an issue to make sure that we feel safe with one another. So I really want to encourage you to ask questions and really ask anything. I'm okay with that. So put your chats in and we'll respond to those after the more prepared remarks. So you might wonder why United Way, why Renee? We are a traditionally white organization. We work with private sector CEOs and other folks. And so as a majority organization in our community, that was the lens people wanted to bring. Now, for me, as you know, I'm a biracial Rotarian, white Norwegian, as well as Taiwanese Chinese. And my dad, in his service with the U.S. Air Force, met my mom in Taiwan and had that experience that Teresa so graciously shared just a couple of minutes ago. So I learned very early on that the community right in front of you is very different than other communities around the world. In my role as president and CEO at United Way of Dane County, we really serve to frame issues, bring the community together and mobilize resources, and make sure we're accountable for results. We are at these tension points in so much of our work, bringing together private sector, nonprofit, government, and grassroots organizations, really understanding higher education, data, research, evidence, as well as lifting up lived experience and people's stories to understand what is true and where can we agree and what can we get done. That is our work. Probably most germane to today's conversation is the role I play as one of the facilitators of the Dane County Law Enforcement Leaders of Color Collaboration. This was a group started in 2014 across Dane County, bringing together leaders of law enforcement with communities of color leaders with the primary mission of building trust. When that mission started, it was after the wake of Ferguson, and people in the law enforcement space said, you know, we've got the potential of that happening here. What are we doing to build trust and foster connections before those things happen? And then, of course, Tony Robinson's shooting. So we have done a lot of work in use of force practices. We have had so many conversations and so many actions that have happened over those many years. And in the last 2 weeks, since the murder of George Floyd, there has been so much more to do has been uncovered. So that is why I'm here today to speak on behalf of all of the work and the action for today, which is what can we do, really understanding what's going on with racism, use of force policy, protests, and rioting. So I want to start first with history, right? And I know there are always people who are questioning start dates and stop dates, so I'm going to round. In general, about 400 years ago, slavery began in the United States. So you look at how do we keep a workforce pliant to continue with our economic development of this country. So we used husbands separating from their wives, children separating from their mothers, lack of education, and punishment for those who wanted education, as well as violence, beatings, sexual violence, all to really ensure a workforce that was not paid. Fast forward 250 years when slavery became illegal. So we have had slavery in our country longer than we haven't. And for the first 100 years of that 150 since slavery ended, discrimination was legal. And there were practices put into place, laws put in place that really held people back politically, economically, and certainly morally. And the legacy of that really is in a very charged word, racism. And at its simplest form, my friend Alpha always says, racism is about bias against skin color. And bias is natural, right? We all have bias. And the opportunity for us to think about that very charged word and what that means inside of economic development, community safety, certainly law enforcement practice, and now what does that mean for how people are responding to this national moment. I think it's important for us to really depoliticize the word, and racism is not about a partisan point of view. Racism is about our four-way test. The history is the truth. It is not fair. It is not building goodwill and friendship for all, and it is not beneficial to all concerned. So that is really the foundation that I want to start with in terms of where we come to and looking at some of the questions that people have been asking and some of the opportunities to have this discussion, just kind of grounding in that context. When I was about 8 years old and we moved to Wisconsin, I really had no consciousness about race, right? My family was diverse. We grew up all over the world. And it was only after moving to our small town near Osseo, Wisconsin, that awareness was really heightened. And I couldn't figure out why people were calling me bad names, why they were mean. And I tried to do everything right. Quiet kid, good at school, helped my parents, did my chores. And the feeling of not belonging was so devastating. And some of the actions that people hurt me with were accepted because adults were just too uncomfortable to know what to do in that instance. By the age of 12, I remember praying to God, please kill me. Please make me sick. Please put me in a car accident. Please take this hurt away. Now, remember, I'm half Norwegian, right? By the age of 12, in 4 years' time, that was the emotional state that I remember. By the time I got to be an older teenager, and again, I feel so lucky that I had that broader worldview growing up, I knew things could be different, and I knew change could happen. And so I think one of the most important things in terms of what action we can take is to believe that people are experiencing harm and hurt. And whether it's individual or organizational or systemic, race, while it shouldn't matter, we know biologically it shouldn't matter, it absolutely does because of the cultural context of how our society has come together. So part of my job and part of my work and part of the work that we do together as a community is to think about how do we bridge those gaps, right? So let's take law enforcement leaders of color. We have use of force policies, and locally we have such strong law enforcement leadership and people who are desiring to do the right thing. And we know people get these jobs because they want to serve and protect the community. What happens on the national scale is when you have somebody videotaped who is charged with public safety, having the trust of a job that allows him or her to have the flexibility to take away someone's freedom, somebody's liberty, somebody's life. It is when that trust is breached that we really open the conversation again about what race means in our community. This wasn't an isolated incident. We have seen this more and more over the past numbers of years, certainly because cell phone videos are more prevalent, certainly because more forces are using body-worn cameras. And it's really, you know, looking at the feeling of upset, of frustration people are having in protests, in rioting, that we just can't understand. And I am not a proponent of any sort of violence, not demolishing our businesses. John Hayes, if you're watching today, I'm so sorry for you and all of your businesses in downtown. You know, the front page of the paper this morning showed painted on the street, defund the police in front of the municipal building and city county building. You know, the front page story over the fold was about police in schools and school resource officers. So you have all of these things going on, and I don't support that at all. But I do understand where that frustration is coming from. So when we think about what can we do, and when Black leaders are saying, you know, why aren't more mainstream organizations, more folks willing to talk about this? It's really in that nugget that I think we can reflect and understand, you know, if we can believe that these feelings of frustration are true, we can actually take the actions to make sure there's a more equitable society for all of us. And that really, I want to be our key takeaway. Inside of the debates of what's been going on in our community, you've got such extreme recommendations right now. And there isn't any consistency in terms of what action to take going forward. And right after, so George Floyd was murdered on Monday. We had a law enforcement leaders of color collaboration meeting on Wednesday. And by Saturday, the first protest happened very peacefully during the day, and then at night, of course, when, you know, chaos broke out on State Street. And, you know, in that moment, I mean, first, personally, I wish I would have said at that Wednesday meeting, what if the protests get violent? What could we be doing to have wise witnesses on the ground, keeping protests more quiet? That said, when I put out a statement saying, you know, the death of George Floyd is heartbreaking, this has happened too many times, we need to keep things peaceful and work through this in a peaceful way. I got so many comments saying, you know, how can you be asking for no violence right now when things have gotten so bad and nobody's listening? And even if we listen, we say we understand, the action doesn't change, as evidenced by that video, which I know we all thought was reprehensible. So in that moment, I really was thinking about, you know, what can we do? And as Rotarians, as people who care deeply about our community, as people who have influence and resources and the ability to make change, how do we hold our decision makers accountable? How do we make sure resources are flowing to the most effective places to make changes? And how do we not let things get so overdue that the only recourse people think they have is to break windows, to paint slogans, and to get to the extremes of things like defunding the police or you know, various recommendations of citizen oversight, which are massive shifts. Now, I do think we are in a time of tumultuous change. Obviously, not only do we have a global pandemic going on, certainly race relations and injustice and the things that we need to do going forward, and now a recession, right, announced yesterday starting as of February 2020. So there are a lot of things going on here. And when we think about our history, not only in the historic record of what has happened, the political influence, the economic instability, and the moral part of what we need to do going forward, it is a time to stop and reflect and to say, you know, what is it that we need to be doing differently now? So there is a moment right now in all of those other facets in terms of politics, economics, history, and our morality to figure out how do we do this going forward. So one of those things is about centering voices, centering results and evidence in terms of what actually works, and to get to a place where we have more relationships with one another to be able to feel more strongly about that change. Another story from when I was younger. I remember one afternoon getting on the bus after school, and I plopped into my favorite seat, which was over the wheel well, so I could prop up my knees and read. And I had about a 45-minute ride home because we lived out in the country. And 3 boys, not unknown to me, boxed me into the chair that day, opened up a library book that featured the Ku Klux Klan and showed a picture of a black man noosed around his neck who had been lynched. And they looked me right in the eyes and they said, "You watch out. This is going to be you." And I remember not being so afraid of that particular threat. And but what struck me the most that day was the number of folks who stood between those boys and the bus driver so that he couldn't see. And in reflecting on that, I remembered thinking, some of them probably agreed, right? Not belonging, not deserving of that humanity. And, you know, kind of thought it was sort of fun to be a part of that power dynamic. Some probably thought it was wrong, but didn't want to take the risk to say something because they didn't want that negative attention turned toward them. And still others who had the sense that I know something's wrong, but I don't know what to do. And I think the questions that I have been asked over the last numbers of weeks, and certainly in the 20 years of experience that I have working in homelessness reduction, economic development, certainly social justice, investing in parents and neighborhoods and schools to get to greater outcomes, the things we all want: higher literacy rates, higher graduation rates, higher economic mobility, safer communities, less violence, less domestic abuse. All of those things have really pointed out that education, financial stability, and health are so important to the building blocks of the stable life, but how we treat each other is fundamental. And that's why I always add that in there, because if we can't fundamentally see each other as humans, if we can't own that we might all have our own biases, and if we can't own that not knowing what to do or not saying anything because it's uncomfortable, then we'll never make those changes. We'll never be able to share with those young people who are our future that we actually can listen and make the changes that we demand, so we can make sure that our history is the truth, that it is fair, that it will build goodwill and better friendships, and that it is beneficial to all concerned. So I'd love to take your questions.
All right, well, thank you so much, Renee, for that presentation. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. One is, there are varying opinions, beliefs regarding resolution of this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Can you please help Rotarians understand why attempts to improve equity and remove racism are still so challenging, even as many people believe things were getting better?
Yeah. So I think that one of the reasons is because we define things getting better so differently. And when we talk about equity in the community, it's really when you can't predict life outcomes based on the color of your skin or your geographic zip code. So when you think about what is equity, it's really around not having poverty or violence or incarceration be determined by the color of somebody's skin, as arbitrary as the color of somebody's skin. And so I think that the starting point in terms of why it's so difficult is because we have different definitions. So when I started at United Way in the CEO role, there were 66,000 people in poverty across Dane County. Last year, before the coronavirus, there were 58,000, according to the most recent census track survey. And so, and the annual survey, obviously, not the 10-year survey. And so you think about that progression, right? Now, the economy was the most important component of that. The work people were doing to help make sure that there was less bias inside of hiring. And certainly with the unemployment as low as it was, more people had access to those jobs. So I think that starting with, the understanding of those factors are all wonderful successes. But underpinning that still is a distance between recognition and ownership of the history of where we have come from. And there are so many people who come up to me and say, stop talking about race. Race isn't a thing. Let's not talk about racism. Things are good. Why can't people just access the opportunity that exists? But when it comes down to that feeling, that experience, I share my personal story because it's kind of shocking, right? And as a half Norwegian person, and certainly half Taiwanese, that to have those types of racial injuries that happen, that's real. And the ones that are visible and the ones that aren't are the things that really hold us back from making that significant progress, even when those measures are improving. Now, I will also say that, right now, with about 5,000 unemployment claims per week, we know that those changes are going to be significantly undermined, the progress that we've made. So, we're back to where we see coronavirus having disproportionate impact on Black and Brown community members. Also, who gets to recover and how quickly in this economic environment. That will also be very directly related to race.
All right. Here's another question. What is United Way's stance, and how is United Way going to respond to the calls to defund or reduce funding for the police department?
Well, that's a very charged question, isn't it? Yes, yeah. So United Way doesn't have an official position on defunding the police or shifting those resources. What we do is work directly with law enforcement, leaders of color, and we figure out, as I said at the beginning, what can we agree upon? So right now, it's hard to figure out what that it is. And so we need to do our work to figure out what does success look like and where can we get everyone to agree in terms of what changes need to happen. And so, as you can imagine, there's a lot of artful conversation that must happen to really understand where people are coming from, the change we want to see. Now, if there were trust that law enforcement were going to serve and protect everybody equally, you wouldn't have the need for citizen oversight. You wouldn't have the demand for defunding the police. So again, I want us to think about inside of that question and what's going on there. The response is really because there isn't a lack of trust to feel like there is equity in terms of the people we trust, who we honor, who we lift up as our guardians, as our peacekeepers, to be able to keep the peace for everyone in our communities equitably. So if you have further questions, put it in the chat.
All right, thank you. Here is a question from Nazra. She asks, how should individuals and organizations commit to relationship building with people of color whose voices are often marginalized?
So, there's the nugget inside that question is all about relationship. And, we really think about that as United Way as proximity. And while we have certainly centered equity and racial disparity in our work for literally 3 decades, starting with the Schools of Hope project, which many of you know, so much of building that relationship is in proximity, right? And when we can serve on committees with other people, when we can volunteer in proximity and see that we're walking side by side with folks who have started in different place for a lot of different reasons, that is the opportunity. So what can businesses and what can individuals do? First of all, I think part of the courage of getting out and meeting other people we don't currently know, it's actually exactly what Susan just talked about in the Rotary survey. What do we love? Connection, right? We love to connect and learn different things and walk in other people's shoes and see through other people's eyes. And so I would recommend figuring out who is somebody who perhaps isn't in your traditional circle. On an individual level, have that cup of coffee. And on a more institutional or committee level, figure out ways to be intentional about building relationships with folks who might be different. I'm going to send some resources out through the newsletter on Friday And some are going to be, for some of us, like, whoa, this is kind of an extreme way of thinking. But there are great reading resources. There are great suggestions in terms of relationship building. I'll also include a little YouTube video that was sent to me that a lot of our board members really found very helpful. So there will be other recommendations for relationship and how to do outreach as well. But the most important thing is to have the courage to do it, because sometimes, that's uncomfortable.
Thank you. Charles McClymans asked, how can Rotarians educate ourselves? And that are there books or podcasts or blogs or other resources that are particularly helpful?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the new words in this space is to be anti-racist. And the recognition of this philosophy is that because historic injustice and unfairness is baked into where we came from, that if you're not anti-racist, then you're complicit in continuing disparity. And that book is called Anti-Racism. And so that would be, again, that's sort of the hot new literature in this space, to be able to take a look at that. Again, in that resource list that I'll send to you, there will be podcasts, movies, and other kinds of things where you can educate yourself more. And so I'll leave it to that list because it's a pretty comprehensive one.
Thank you. Ron Luskin asks, how can we better support businesses run by people of color?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we are lucky in this community that we have a very robust Latino and African American Chamber of Commerce, 2 chambers of commerce, in fact. I know that there are different names of different professional associations and things too, but even if you just Google, Black-owned businesses or Latinx-owned businesses, restaurants, catering, consulting, those kinds of groups. There are resource directories that are abundant in Dane County, and so to be able to pick up the phone or send an email or send a text to one of those folks is a great way to invest dollars and to help grow their independence, their economic stability, and to help have a whole robust economy for all of us. So resources online in particular, or call and reach out to those groups.
Yeah, and how can employers be more proactive in creating a more welcoming, diverse workplace?
Thank you.
And why?
Yeah, so the experience that I have most directly with this is in something called the Hire Initiative, and it was something that came up. A lot of you know that United Way has gone to a 2-generation strategy. There's great research that shows when you are investing in families, to do that from a parent and a child perspective at the same time, could be a grandparent, right, caregiver, child, at the same time, you can actually help the economic stability faster. And so the Hire Initiative was really in that same vein, thinking about how do we coordinate education, housing, and employment all at the same time. And one of the things that came out of that, we have about 50 businesses who are involved with that, and their goal is to have a more diverse workforce, as well as to help lift folks out of poverty. So they've committed to a working wage, and they are also understanding of the housing, the child care, health care access, all those other kinds of needs. So the businesses, after a number of years of doing this work together, really had some great questions about hiring practices and how to eliminate bias from hiring. A lot of you have seen the research. Joaquin Jones and John Jones can submit the exact same resume with the exact same education, the exact same experience, literally the same resume, and John will get more calls back than Joaquin, for example. And so really thinking about how to strip out that bias that might come into play with hiring. Also, they asked us questions about training for managers. There were a lot of managers who just felt uncomfortable with more diversity in the workplace. Maybe the teams were all white, and this was the first time a person or two had come into the workforce who was a different race, and that cultural competence in terms of having a welcoming, inclusive environment. So they asked us to do a lot of training on that as well, including a specific line implicit bias. So there are a lot of folks in the community who could help train on that and to help with awareness and help evaluate practices to see how welcoming and inclusive workplaces are. And I think that people follow leadership. So the importance of leaders really getting uncomfortable to understand what this is all about and to know, again, in the most recent 10 years of research and data, there is so much evidence that a diverse workplace helps with productivity, helps in revenue generation, helps with customer insights. And so for business reasons as well as for other community reasons, it's just a wonderful way to be able to help meet the new future of customers, communities, society, and business. So there are a lot of great resources for that as well. In fact, maybe I can also send over, there was a Harvard Business Review article just published about 2 days ago that talked about what businesses can do, so I'll include that in the resource list as well.
Okay. You mentioned the difference between being not racist and being anti-racist. Can you help us all know how can we be anti-racist?
So, you know, in fact, why don't I use a visual aid here, because this is a graphic that I was just sent from a friend. So, you know, talking about, you know, different evolutions of what that means. And I just posted this on social media, so if you want to take a look there, you can grab the graphic from there. So, you know, from being in the first category, which is more of a fear category, it's sort of denying that anything needs to change, denying that race is actually a fundamental issue in our society and community. The next band out is to sort of own there's more that I can learn. There's an opportunity for me to reach out and experience the world differently and walk in somebody else's shoes. And there's sort of that recognition that different people live different problems, and so they therefore see different solutions. And then that outer ring of what does it mean to be anti-racist, it is to actually advocate for changes, to actively scan the environment for where are there imbalances. And one of the most uncomfortable parts about that is how do we actually benefit from that imbalance, right? So in my neighborhood, which is a mostly white neighborhood, I have higher property values, and that is a privileged position in terms of wealth and those kinds of things because of, you know, redlining, which existed way before I was even born. So I think it's that type of intentional evaluation and doing things we Rotarians do, which is objectively think about, you know, what is the truth, what is fair, and the other components of our four-way test.
That's wonderful. Finally, just how do we further, this will be our last question, how do we further racial justice and understanding, and reinforcing the important message of that Black lives matter, while simultaneously supporting our fragile, now boarded up downtown businesses and restaurants and that are suffering from the recession that we are now in.
And, you know, two things at once can be true, right? You know, one of the most politicized phrases in our country is Black Lives Matter. And I think sometimes people mean that means at the exclusion of other races. And really what people are trying to convey is Black Lives Matter too. And a friend of mine had a great image. You know, if you're sitting at the dinner table and everyone gets a slice of meatloaf except you, and you say, I should get a slice of meatloaf, and somebody else says, absolutely, everyone should get a slice of meatloaf, but you didn't get one, that's what the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to talk about. So I think, you know, that's kind of one phrase. So I think acknowledging some of that historical injustice, but also acknowledging we need healthy, vibrant business. The way to express our frustration is not to, you know, spray paint and punch and throw rocks at police and you know, light fires. And so for our businesses to really nurture, you know, how do we help keep more businesses around so that we survive the coronavirus and safer at home and this economic recession is a really important thing. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. So I think that the opportunity is, if we can really believe that there's an opportunity to honor all lives, have that respect, and know that there is a bigger barrier for folks who are of darker skin, then we can actually prevent some of the other injustice, if you will, that happens against small business owners and some of the other destruction that happens in our community. So, you know, again, the most important thing is to believe. I remember one Rotarian who came up to me. I was president the year Justified Anger and Race to Equity report came out. And he came up to me one day and said, Renee, I just don't understand. Life is so good here. I just don't understand it. And we had a really great conversation. And about 3 days later, that conversation was still in my head. And I gave him a call. And I said, you know what? I don't know that you have to understand it. You just have to believe it. And once you believe it, I think the other things fall into place. So thank you so much for the time. I know this is a hard topic. Watch for the reading resource list. And I love you so much, Rotarians. And I can't wait to see you all in person again. Thank you. This way. Here you go.
Well, thank you again, Renee, and thank you to Teresa for setting the stage for today's program. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again next week online. Our meeting is adjourned.